I want to ask another question because you talked and I said, remember, there was your first answer. I was like, oh, there's so much to unpack there. So one of the things was that you talked about that 3 to 5 year plan and impacting a company's overall 3 to 5 year plan assumes one thing. We've got a seat at the table, that we've got an ear, and almost 100% of all of your peers that have come onto the podcast have said, in most companies, we've really got to earn that seat at the table. Now, Danaher has put your role in place for a very important reason. What would you say to others that are struggling to get a seat at the table and some recommendations on maybe how they can do that, how to start thinking about that?
I think we've been blessed. About 2 years ago, our C-level basically said, hey, why are we recruiting so many different ways? Because I mentioned that the 15 different operating companies that are part of Danaher. And prior to 2 years ago, when they said, hey, why are we doing this? And I guess it's actually 2.5 years ago now. I'm looking over at the calendar as I say that. But, they said, why are we recruiting so many different ways? And it's because each of those operating companies had a choice of whether they were using the centralized TA process we'd set up or they were doing it on their own. So some of them had HR partners, often working a lot with agencies. Some of them had their own recruiters, but they weren't really following what our VP of Global TA was setting as a strategy. They opted in when they did or didn't follow the processes. So they said, hey, this doesn't make sense. Everything is going to centralize on their TA globally. So we got that executive buy-in that said, hey, everything flows through us. So we were able to go into Workday and we turned off the access for anybody in HR, not in talent acquisition, but the HR business partners. They can't create requisitions in Workday recruitment anymore. So only somebody in TA can. So a manager
Oh,
has to work with us in order to run a campaign to hire somebody through Workday. Could an HR person support it outside with an agency and then just push that hire into Workday HRIS? They could, but we'd see it and we'd go back and talk about it. So we did a big communications campaign, but I think getting that executive buy-in is the biggest piece, which obviously in order to get the seat at the table, either you get the buy-in first or you have to claim your seat at the table to go develop the buy-in. But I think that's the important part. But I think it's collaborating with the right leaders and making sure they see the value in. So if we're just talking about a corporate TA perspective, now from a contingent workforce, procurement owns our program, not HR here. And they don't have that same governance at this point in time to say, you must come through the MSP for all of your temporary workers. So we still have some operating companies doing some things on their own. They're all in the MSP, but whether that message has gotten to every nook and cranny of that operating company, in some cases not. So there's still going to be some that are working locally with the staffing firm, paying them an invoice manually. There's still a lot of SOW work going on. So we haven't rallied that all in yet. And procurement has their seat at the table. So it's not that they don't, but it's where does that business case sit to compel the business to not go get the best talent quickly, as opposed to working through a program that they're not sure we can get them that same talent. So that becomes education. So we are out there working with the OPCO level procurement people, educating them about the MSP, its strengths, its opportunities for development. So we do have a few pilots that will go on this year that I'm hoping will lead to in 2026 procurement being able to draw more of that work in because they'll be asking to come into those programs after they're piloted and the proof of concept is there. So I didn't really answer the question, but I think a lot of it is figuring out what the needs are, identifying the model where you can build a better mousetrap. I use that term too much. It's age old and cliche, but if you can build a better mousetrap for how they're doing it today, prove it to get the proof of concept through pilots and then get the right people to help become influencers and champions of that new program and to where they actually want to get that program. And you may have to say, hey, sorry, we're already full on implementations for this quarter. We can bring you in Q4. So that's ideally where you create the pull instead of you trying to push it. They're drawn into the programs. But I think it's hard. And it's going to be reading the room and knowing the politics within your company because you can't just go sit at the table. You have to show them why they want you there.